The funeral ground was wrapped in silence, the kind that presses heavily on the chest. Rows of soldiers stood perfectly still, their uniforms sharp, their faces cold with discipline. At the center lay the flag-draped coffin of a legendary four-star general, a man whose name commanded respect across the nation. The slow sound of a military drum echoed through the air as high-ranking officers, politicians, and decorated veterans took their seats. Just as the ceremony was about to begin, an unexpected figure appeared at the edge of the crowd. She was an old woman, dressed in a simple black shawl, her back slightly bent with age. Her shoes were worn, her hands shaking as she clutched a small purse close to her chest. She didn't look like she belonged among the powerful and the important. Yet her eyes were fixed on the coffin, filled with a pain that words could never explain. As she took a few hesitant steps forward, two armed guards immediately blocked her path. Only authorized personnel, one of them said firmly, without even meeting her eyes. I just want to stand closer, the woman whispered, her voice trembling. Only for a moment, the guards exchanged quick glances. Rules were strict, no exceptions. With a sharp gesture, they signaled her to step back. The old woman didn't argue. She simply lowered her head and moved aside, her lips pressed together as if holding back tears. People nearby watched briefly, then turned away. To them, she was nobody, just another stranger at a place reserved for honor and rank. But as she stood there alone, staring at the coffin from a distance, the wind lifted her shawl slightly, revealing a faded photograph in her trembling hand. No one noticed it, no one realized that the woman they had just ignored carried a secret strong enough to shake the entire funeral. And this was only the beginning. The ceremony moved forward, but the old woman did not leave. She stood near the edge of the funeral ground, separated from the honored guests by a thin line of authority and cold stares. The speeches began, words about bravery, leadership, and sacrifice echoed through the air, but none of them reached her heart. Her eyes never left the flag-covered coffin. A gust of wind passed through the ground, carrying the sharp sound of the bugle being tested in the distance. The woman tightened her grip on the small photograph hidden in her palm. It was old, creased, and worn at the edges, just like her memories. She took a slow, careful breath and stepped forward once more. Immediately, security reacted. "Ma'am, you've been told to stay back," a guard said more harshly this time, placing his hand out to stop her. Another guard moved closer, blocking her completely. Their faces showed irritation now, not patience. "I won't cause trouble," she said softly. "I only need to see him, from closer." "Step away," the guard ordered. "This area is restricted." Her voice cracked as she tried to speak again, but no sound came out. Tears welled in her eyes, slipping down her wrinkled cheeks. Still, she did not raise her voice. She did not beg, she simply nodded and stepped back, as if she had expected this rejection all along. Nearby, a few officers noticed the scene. One shook his head, another looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. To them, the rules mattered more than compassion. The woman returned to her place, her shoulders heavy with sorrow. She unfolded the photograph slightly, glancing at it for strength. In the picture was a young boy in an oversized uniform, smiling proudly beside a woman who looked much younger, but whose eyes were the same. What no one knew was that this photograph connected her to the general in a way no metal ever could. And soon, that connection would be impossible to ignore. The funeral reached its most solemn moment. The crowd fell completely silent as the bugle began to play, its slow, mournful notes drifting across the ground. Every head bowed in respect. Soldiers brought their heels together, standing at full attention. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. The old woman stood frozen at the back, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew this was her last chance. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the faded photograph fully, staring at the young face captured in it. Tears blurred her vision. Without realizing it, she whispered a single word. "Daniel." The name was barely louder than the wind, yet it cut through the silence like a blade. A senior officer standing nearby stiffened. His head turned slowly toward her. That name, very few people ever used it. To the world, the man in the coffin was a four-star general, a symbol of power and command. But, Daniel, was a name from a different time, a private name, buried deep beneath rank and titles. "Did you say something?" the officer asked, his voice low and sharp. The woman looked up, startled. For a second, she seemed unsure whether to speak again. Then she nodded gently. "That was his name," she said. "The name I knew him by." The officer's expression changed from irritation to confusion. He studied her face closely now, the lines of age, the pain in her eyes, the way she held the photograph like a lifeline. Around them, the ceremony continued, unaware. But something had shifted. The officer turned toward the front, his gaze locked on the platform where the four-star general stood, overseeing the final honors. Slowly, realization began to dawn. The whispered name had reached the wrong ears, or perhaps, the right ones. Because the general's head lifted suddenly, and his eyes found the old woman. The moment their eyes met, something changed in the general's face. His posture, once rigid and unshakable, softened just slightly. The world around him, the soldiers, the music, the speeches, seemed to fade into nothing. He took one step forward, then another. The bugle's sound faltered as the general slowly raised his hand. Stop. The command was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Instantly, the music cut off. Soldiers froze mid-motion. Conversations died in their throats. Hundreds of eyes turned in confusion as the four-star general stepped away from the platform and walked directly toward the back of the ground. Guards straightened in panic, unsure whether to block his path or move aside. No one had ever seen a ceremony halted like this, especially not by the general himself. He stopped in front of the old woman. Up close, her hands shook uncontrollably. She lowered her eyes, afraid she had done something wrong. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The general stared at her face as if searching through decades of memory. Then his voice broke the silence. "Is it really you?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Tears streamed freely down the woman's cheeks now. She nodded. "I didn't know if you'd remember me," she said softly. The general swallowed hard, his jaw tightened, and his eyes glistened, something no soldier had ever witnessed. Slowly, he turned to the guards. "Stand down," he ordered firmly. "She belongs here." The guards stepped back at once, shock written across their faces. The general then offered his arm to the old woman, guiding her forward with a care that felt almost unreal. Behind them, the entire funeral ground stood in stunned silence. Whatever this woman's story was, it was powerful enough to stop history in its tracks. The old woman walked beside the general toward the coffin, her steps slow but steady now. Every eye followed them. The soldiers who moments ago had stood like statues now looked on in disbelief. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. They stopped in front of the flag-draped coffin. For a long moment, the woman simply stood there, staring at it as if the years were falling away before her eyes. Then, with trembling hands, she opened her purse and took out the faded photograph. She placed it gently on top of the flag. "This was him," she said softly. "Before the medals, before the rank, before the world knew his name." Her voice shook, but she continued. "When his parents were gone, he had nowhere to go. I wasn't rich. I wasn't powerful. I was just someone who couldn't turn him away." Tears streamed down her face. "I raised him, taught him right from wrong. Watched him dream of wearing that uniform." The crowd gasped quietly. The four-star general stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately, he removed his cap. His voice was firm, but filled with emotion. "She is the reason I stand here today," he said. "Everything I became, began with her." He raised his hand in a sharp salute, not to the coffin, but to the old woman. One by one, every soldier followed. Boots clicked, hands rose. A full military salute echoed across the ground, not for rank or power, but for love and sacrifice. The old woman covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Tears fell freely around her. That day, the funeral honored more than a general. It honored the woman who made him one.